Good afternoon. This is Ben Yarborough with Att&ck Security. I'm pleased to have today Aaron Bieber, one of our lead developers, and we're going to share some insights from Geo Fence, the new feature in AccessEnforcer version 5.0. And we think it's a highly effective tool, very well suited for small businesses that can help. And we're going to go over a number of reasons why we think it can help, and also look at data. And Aaron's going to give a demo of a live site in a data center. Aaron's, give a shout out and tell us what's happening in Colorado. Is it cold as it is in Charlotte today?
No, I don't know. How cold is it there?
It was about 28 this morning, so it's pretty chilly.
All right. I think it was 14 this morning.
Ooh,
but it's
warming
up to about, I don't know, yeah, 33 now, so not too bad.
Well, I was worried winter wasn't going to come this way, but it has, and so we're excited about the content. I was up here late last night getting this together. Hopefully it all makes sense. There's likely mistakes, and we've got we'll be looking for feedback as we go. But what we're going to hit today is we're going to just a real quick overview of Geo Fence, because Aaron's going to get into more info on the demo. I'm going to share some insights on some cybersecurity defense models and how that relates to Geo Fence. I'm going to also then peek into the early data. We have about 10% of our sites have adopted Geo Fence already, and we're hoping that after this this presentation, you'll see the value of it and think about implementing it at your sites. We'll do the demo and then talk to you about how you can get it and make sure that it's available and you have the right system to run it in terms of the age of your system and the like. So Geo Fence, essentially it's 5 clicks and you can block the world. So you could do it, you can get some interactive heat maps and some set the features up by using your map or set it up with tables, but it's really pretty easy. There are 2 major decisions you have to make. Is do you want to be allow only or block specific countries? And we'll talk a little bit about that later in the demo. And then what to do with the unassigned IP addresses. That's a big question, but I think after you see the data, you will hopefully agree that you should block IP addresses that have not yet been assigned. I'll try to give you some insights on that. And we hope that you will also allow only specific countries. We think that's a far more effective. Most of our audience is in the US and Canada. And so, you know, if you can limit to that and block unknown source IPs, you're going to get a great deal of benefit out of out of Geo Fence. So the way it works is we maintain a database in the AccessEnforcer, and that we pull the IP addresses from the ICANN regional internet registries, and I think there are 5 of these. And they are responsible for managing the assignment of the IP addresses to organizations, which are called ASN organizations, and the associated country code. It's not perfect, it's not the best, but we want you to understand we have to rely on a resource for that attribution. It's not appropriate for us to guess it, or, you know, so this is an authoritative registry, and so we think it's the appropriate one. And then, you know, there's some color coding and so forth. So how does this actually help? So if you look at some of the defense models that enterprises use to take corrective measures and controls, what the latest rage is kind of trying to understand the attackers based on different models and implement controls around those different models. There are 3 primary models. The kill chain, created by Lockheed Martin, is a traditional DoD military sort of methodology for defending. The attack model by Mitre is much more detailed, tactics and techniques and things like that, and very specific in connecting those with different known attackers or attack groups. Advanced threat or advanced persistent threat groups. And then there's a third one called the diamond model, which is a little bit looser, a little bit more early stage model. I'm not going to get into that one today, but we're going to go over these others kind of quickly. So the cyber kill chain takes 7 stages of an attack, and this really stems from the traditional military real world attack. where the adversary is engaged in reconnaissance to identify its targets and where it might be weak. Then it's going to plan the operation and weaponize the different tools it needs to essentially carry out the attack. Then it's going to launch that operation to transmit the attack and ultimately exploit whatever target they're trying to attack. And then they're going to install a beachhead or get control of that target. And then that control expands into command and control, which is the remote control, and ultimately to achieve the actionable objectives, which in the world of cyber is data theft, or most commonly data ransom by using cryptography. So those are the 7 stages. The interesting thing about this is that at each of those stages, if you can obstruct the attacker, you win. You don't have to beat them at every stage. You just got to beat them somewhere, and then they got to try again. So this is really interesting because when you look at geofence, geofence allows you to stop reconnaissance, to stop delivery of an attack, and even to stop the exploit itself. And in some cases, actually, the actionable objective might be a brute force or something like that. But so there's an opportunity to use geofence to seize the advantage and to help reduce your exposure because it's well suited for small businesses. Now, there's some resources here, these links, including some academic type papers that talk about this, including using intel-driven cyber defense methodology, which basically is the idea to look at the data to see where you can most quickly position your organization for more security. And we've done that with Gatekeeper, as I've shared before. When you look at what our sites face, over 90% of attacks at small businesses that we have been monitoring are getting RDP attacked. So that's kind of why we built Gatekeeper and added GeoFence. We think it really makes a lot of sense from the data we see. The second model is, again, a much more detailed model, and it involves essentially a series of tactics. I think there are 10 different tactics that are used by adversaries. And then underneath of those tactics, it outlines different techniques, and it tries to attribute those techniques to different advanced persistent threat actors. And this, again, is built on an enterprise model. And what's interesting is when you look at GeoFence, it has the ability to help you obstruct a wide variety of tactics that adversaries deploy, including the reconnaissance, the initial access, the execution, credential access, which would just be, username and password, right? Advanced discovery and impact, such again as a brute force or other denial of service type attack. And the first stage is sort of the most obvious, the reconnaissance. And the purpose of reconnaissance in any mission is to gather information that you can use for your planning, that you can use to learn about the target victim, the infrastructure, the personnel, and how to use that information to be efficient. Because an attacker doesn't have to, compromise everybody. They only have to compromise the least prepared among us. It's kind of like the shark, if you're swimming and the shark comes, you don't have to outswim the shark. You got to outswim the other guys. So, attackers are no different. They want to execute the least amount of effort to get their goal, unless you're a unique targeted attack. So if you can make it harder, then you are succeeding, because you're elevating the economic cost of effort for the attacker, because they're going to use the information they get from you to prioritize who they attack. And you'll see in the data who's prioritizing what type of attacks. And the interesting thing about it is this organized, automated reconnaissance that's going on the internet. It's all about building a pipeline of business for mostly these financially motivated attackers. The mode of the day is RDP, and the mode of the day is frankly using remote access tools, exploiting them, and infecting folks with ransomware and making money out of it. And they're doing quite well. So until that one dries up, they're going to stay focused. But they do this reconnaissance, they can build database for future activities. So if you can minimize that, then you're going to be far more well positioned to defend your organizations. So in terms of the GeoFence tool, again, it's going to stop active scanning, host information gathering, and network information gathering. Those techniques actually have sub-techniques. For instance, active scanning includes IP blocks or vulnerability scanning. Host information includes data about the hardware, the software, the firmware, and even the client configuration on the device. Now, of course, this can include both the external device, the firewall, the router, which is what we do, but it can also include every device that you permit access to inside your organization with a port forward rule. So if you've got ports open for SMTP or for a web server, or HTTPS or FTP or anything like that, it's open to the world. Unless you've got it controlled with access control policy to a specific source or CIDR range of IP addresses, then the adversary's out there gathering this information about your sites. Think about that. They're figuring out that you run XYZ system, and there's no known vulnerability for that today, but it's part of their database now, so that when that vulnerability ticks up, they can come after you. So in terms of mitigations, this was really insightful for me when I saw it. But in Mitre's model, they say reconnaissance really cannot be easily mitigated. And while it certainly can't be stopped, when you look at the sort of posture of the small business market that we serve, we think there's an advantage SMB. And that's why we built Geo Fence. So if we take that advantage and leverage that, and we can stop the scanning, then maybe they can't even pursue some of these initial access techniques, which is that next stage. But nevertheless, they may find it, and then try to use US-based resources, and that's sort of a topic in next stage of this evolution. But what you'll see here is the techniques in the initial access include exploiting public-facing applications, exploiting remote services, and valid accounts. So valid accounts, if you've got Gatekeeper, where you've got 2FA, access control, and RDP, then you've elevated the burden to the adversary significantly, because that account requires that multi-factor authentication token, and so the two play hand in hand in terms of Geo Fence and Gatekeeper quite well. But nonetheless, you can shield these systems, and obviously what the attacker is trying to do is get into your network. And once they get in any of these methods, the most common of which is public-facing vulnerable systems. For instance, a lot of the RDP vulnerabilities that we've seen over the last 2 years are in fact pre-authentication vulnerabilities, which is why they're so bad. You don't even need a username and a password. So in your mind, Aaron, pre-authentication vulnerabilities, how does that make you feel?
Oh, it's pretty terrifying. Not easy, though.
Yeah. So you're not sleeping easy at night. And so if you can shrink who that's exposed to right off the bat, you're going to really make it harder for the bad guy to get to you, and that's important. So I didn't do this with every tactic in the Mitre model because it's a lot of detail, but I did take it with this initial access one. And they cite some examples of some different methods, some different APTs have used to get initial access. For instance, exploiting Citrix vulnerabilities, exploiting VPN vulnerabilities or gateway vulnerabilities, or VPN vulnerabilities with PulseSecure and FortiGate, or exploiting Microsoft IIS vulnerabilities, or SQL injections, which are, I think that's a data field injection typically, right, Aaron?
It can be.
Caught you off guard on this one.
It can be used to gain. I couldn't find the mute button. It could be used to gain access. I mean, if you can inject SQL, like you could a lot of times add your own credentials, or find existing credentials of people, or there's all kinds of things. So
right, but essentially it's an access tool these guys use, and if you can prevent them from even getting to the SQL injection opportunity with Geo Fence, or better yet with Gatekeeper, you're really much better positioned. So there are mitigations for enterprises on initial access, and they're not update your software, vulnerability scanning, privileged account management, network segmentation. All of these are things we all know about, right? reduce your exposure to breaching of initial access. However, advantage SMB, Geo Fence, right? So that's another hurdle that you can impose on the adversary to get access. So now let's turn a little bit to the data. So we've got, took a snapshot of 30 days of data for the month of November and looked at common targeted services reports, the source countries where they're coming from, and then what countries are the most active. We'll look at a few of those, what ports they're targeting, because they're not all the same. And then what organizations or ISPs are generating the most attacks. And then how do we look at IP addresses where there's no assigned countries, and how can we guide you on what to do about that data set. So in terms of the most common targeted services, this was the top 19, and I threw OpenVPN, which was ranked number 164. And so you'll see it's pretty broad. But this first one at the top, boot P server, it takes the cake in terms of activity, followed by RDP. In our world, RDP, Telnet, HTTPS, SMTP, HTTP, Microsoft SQL, SSH, OpenVPN. Hopefully nobody's exposing publicly LDAP or 137 or DNS or SIP. If they've got SIP, that is, they need to lock that down. Because these things are all, that's a lot of activity. These are gazillions of events. And so they're essentially, Aaron, when you look at these, what comes to mind? Why are these on the list, and why are they top targets?
Oh, well, RDP is pretty obvious. It's had a number of vulnerabilities. Boot P is curious. I don't specifically know why it's at the very top, but I'd like to.
Yeah,
I'll probably try to find out.
Telnet as a protocol has a lot of vulnerabilities, right?
Say that again.
Telnet has a lot of vulnerabilities generally.
Yeah, there's some good ones. It's used a lot less nowadays.
Yep.
But I guess it's still pretty common enough that people look for it.
Yeah.
So.
Lazy Unix administrators, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
And then, HTTPS, obviously that's your, web server application, SMTP. They're just looking for where they could target that. The SQL is a lot of vulnerabilities in that if that's exposed. And then, SSH, some of these are, it's a balance of lots of vulnerabilities or easily exploited vulnerabilities with, well, if you can exploit it, what's the value of the target, right? So, RDP, a lot of vulnerabilities, high impact vulnerabilities, and considerable target value if you can get it, right? So there's sort of a algorithm or sort of dynamic that I think goes into the consideration of what folks are looking for here. In terms of source activity, now this was the 30 days ending November 30th at midnight. And looking at the events by country, a couple things jump out. Obviously, Germany, Russia, unassigned, and China are all of interest. 222 others. Only the top 10 are 85% here. China is a relatively low number in terms of activity. The unassigned is a high number, so that's again something that we want to touch base and give some guidance on. And then what was surprised to me was the amount from other European countries, frankly, Germany, Netherlands, France, Great Britain. Those were all, I was a little surprised to see the amount of activity coming from those countries. So if you look at it by, sorry about the excess bold on the chart there, I had a little formatting challenge last night. On the unique source IPs, so this is how many times in the 30-day period, not how many times, but how many unique source IPs were seen. And in terms of the total number of source IPs that we saw, who was allocating the most IT infrastructure by way of IP address to their activity. And then derive from that the average number of events during the period per the unique source IP. And what that shows to us is the different characteristics of the activities of these guys, right? So while China uses a large number of IP addresses, they are fairly stealthy. 28, that's less than one event per day based on our user population. Russia, on the other hand, is, almost 10 times that. It's like 250 events per month. So what would that be about? Divided by that 30, that's significantly higher, right? India's sort of in between. And then you look at the unassigned, and the unassigned is really noisy. Lots of, not many IPs in that bucket, but they're really noisy. So what you'll see is the before they get assigned, and what I believe is happening is the IPs are getting transferred in a window of period before the registration's updated. And so there's that window when it's deemed unassigned because the registry hasn't distributed the new assignment. So then in terms of Russia, so again, this is source IP. What are the interests coming out of Russia? No surprise, RDP, 10 to 1 over SMTP. So there's no surprise that RDP is the #1 vector for ransomware. 80% is what CoveSource has recognized in their ransomware remediation services, which actually fits, if you look at the, roughly 20% RDP, to everything else is like 1% or lower, and the SMTP is 2%. So that's about right. I mean, the amount of effort that's going into exploiting RDP is 10 times the effort to find SMTP systems. So again, this is reconnaissance. The other is the, SMTP, SSH, DNS. That was a little bit of a surprise, looking for open DNS systems. And then SMB with 445, and then even the SMT SSL is on there, and then BitTorrent with peer-to-peer. In terms of RDP, I aggregated a number of destination ports that we see a lot of partners use for port forwarding, and when you add those, you kind of bump up the effective targeting of RDP. So this, again, soft plug for Gatekeeper, but it's pretty clear they're after these services. When you look at China, it's quite a different picture. Microsoft SQL, Telnet, web servers, null, which is there's no destination port. I'm assuming that's an ICMP ping. Aaron, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that one. And then the Telnet, what was interesting to me on the Telnet is the allocation of resources relative to the activity. So that 35% of their IPs that they're using for this activity are targeting Telnet, which makes it from a resource target really, really important target for them, followed by SQL and the HTTP and alternate HTTP services. So then the stealthiness level, the lower the number of events per IP per day, suggests to me that the activity is much more stealthy. So looking for HTTPS servers, that's pretty noisy activity coming out of China. Going after Telnet, going after the alternate web servers, and maybe even SMB with 445 and SSH, that's a little narrower. And then lastly, the unassigned is a little bit active. There are not a lot of resources there, but again, they're looking at 60% a lot of other ports as well. So they're building that recon database of future targets. Aaron, do you have any other thoughts on these couple slides?
So I'm surprised by Telnet. I did not expect that to be as high as it is.
Yeah.
The null could be from like partially initiated TCP connections. I'm not entirely sure where we're marking the
Yep.
the desk port for on those, but Yeah.
On the looking at the ASN organizations, now what we're using here is the organization that the registry assigns to the IP address. And fascinating is the top 25 account for 77% of the activity. Now these are the ASN organizations that are the top 25 event generating organizations. So they generate 77% of the activity, but they're using only about 17% of the source IPs. So these are what I call mostly noisy attackers. But what's a little scary is embedded within these really active guys are a couple of stealthy ones. Number 7, OVHSAS. They're only hitting you about 20 times a day from an IP. So it's pretty persistent. They're throwing a lot of resources there. And then ChinaNet is even lower in terms of events per IP per day. So it's like once they use that IP once, they don't use it again today. You know, it's so they're throwing a lot of resources there. If you see anything on these names, now one thing to be aware of is this data as it relates to the organization is strictly the org name. What you'll see if you look at the other 2,050, which have 83% of the other IPs we saw in November and 22% of the activity, many of those are affiliates or have common names or are under common ownership, like the OOO network of data centers, Selectel. There are a lot of OOOs, so I believe those are related. There are a lot of OVHs, and so many of those are under common control. And they also, and they're doing that across different countries, or when they acquire other enterprises and roll them up, change their name. So when you look at the allocation of IPs and think of that as an infrastructure resource, the top couple of guys are a lot of the IPs there. That's like top 25 are 42% of the IPs, but only 5% of the activity. So the guys that we're seeing here, these are really stealthy. They're less than 1/3 of an event per day per source IP. They're just slow and steady. So these guys are they're out there just building that database, building that reconnaissance. What do you got on, did you open a port today? Did you open this one? Did you open that one? That data is good for a long time. And so, there are a few organizations, those top 3 are all Chinese based. And you'll see that, they're all low and slow, stealthy, but they're allocating a lot of IP addresses. So in terms of when the source country is null, what are we seeing from a target standpoint there for the 30 days, and what is the ASN organization? So what you'll notice is 99% up at the top of the far right of these events, there's no organization. So that fits with my assumption that it doesn't prove it, but it's consistent with my thinking that the IP address has been assigned to a new organization in a new country, and neither the country nor the organization has yet been entered and is not available. And so we do update that, but it happens very fast. So if they're constantly changing it, there's a gap there. So 99% of the activity, 99.9% of the activity for unknown countries is also, we don't have the organization either. And this represents, but it only represents 10% of the IPs. So it's most of the activity, but it's only a handful of the IP addresses. And then so when you get down to the, once the name's assigned, you'll see that, I don't know if any of these guys excite you, but if we go back to the, the OOS network and the ProServe and the IP volume, ChinaNet, if we go back up here to the bad actors over here, it's the same guys, right? So they're just rolling their IPs around and reassigning them, and then using that window. So my recommendation, and Aaron, I don't know what your thought is, when you look at what the top targets when we don't know the country, it's 445, 443, RDP, 23, and SQL. So those are all consistent with the sort of the general top targets. Although it's the boot P is gone, which was interesting, and so but it's more I think lucrative, immediately accessible assets. So my recommendation is based on this insight is that you block unknown IP addresses if we don't have the country. What are your thoughts on that?
Yep. Yeah, totally agree. That's a lot of stuff coming in if you don't.
Yeah, you go back to the volume there. Actually gets a good point. So if you look at the activity level, almost 10.5% of activity is coming from sites with unassigned country codes. So that's a huge volume. So then I took one more look at the data, and I took the sites that have activated Geo Fence, and I took one 24-hour period that ended the last day of our 30-day window. And I said, well, what's the sort of makeup on a per site basis? What's kind of the unique IP addresses and the number of events per site, and the average events per IP at that site? And if you look at the averages, it's a pretty big number. The average site and the median is pretty tight for the number of IPs, and the standard deviation, all that's pretty tight, right? So that means most people see about 3,000 unique source IP addresses every day. But we did have one that saw 30,000. So I'll come back to that. That's a huge number relative to the median and the standard deviation. And then we also had the minimums, but the minimum could be a site. Some of the sites, a handful of sites, may have only been operating on Geo Fence for a little bit of time, or we may only have the data back from them for a little bit of time during that 24-hour period. And then if you look at the events per site, you'll see the data gets a little wider. Average is 40,000, but in the median, that number at which half is above and half is below, was 18,000. So the average is getting skewed pretty heavily by some people at the upper end. And then the standard deviation. So I'm not a math genius. I'm a lawyer, so I lie with numbers, not find truth. No, that's not really true. But my understanding of standard deviations is, that's the percentage. I think I'm not sure if it's a third. Would be a third or 95%. It's the high number of sites are underneath the 73,000. And so there are some that are 10 times the standard deviation, which was alarming. And then on the events per IP per site, so that's taking the average use of the resource at that site. So the average was 41, but the median was only 8. Again, suggesting that there's some sites that are getting hit a lot by some really noisy probers that are skewing the numbers, because most people are, half of our population is 8 or fewer events per IP, meaning most people are kind of getting hit by stealthy discovery activity. And then the standard deviation at which most people fall within is at 402. So that gives you some visibility there. So what does that mean? So when I looked at our population set, I was like, well, how many sites fall outside of the standard deviation with the average events per IP? And it's less than 1%. So there are a few sites out there that are getting hammered by some IPs. And so sort of what does all this mean? I think those are the sites that need to look at the data, right? I mean, they need to understand what's coming at them and see if there's a reason that a system is pounding on their door. The events per site, there were about 14% of sites that were above the standard deviation of 73,000 events per day. And again, this is on our total population. So this is not set, if you segmented it further by partner, that might show something different, right? So if you were able to see your data set and see any, what's normal for your world, that might help you figure some things out. Likewise, on the unique addresses, IP addresses, 27% of the sites were above the 2895 standard deviation. So, if folks are interested in this or have questions or comments or have better understanding of the math, I am interested in follow-up or any suggestions on possible ways that we can help you use the data to harvest, implement better security. So with that, I'm going to take a pause to see if there are any questions or chats. I don't see any so far. Maybe I've gone too fast, but if the slides will be available, so you guys can look at the data. And if you're interested in learning more, let me know. So Aaron, this is a segue for you to show them really the interesting stuff. And then I'll circle back to how to get Gatekeeper. So I'll need to figure out how to share and change presenter. So
hold on a sec, I gotta give it. I don't know. It shows
I've got
sharing with my old. Yeah.
Are you logged in as? Did that pop up?
It should. Oh, there we go.
So just to be clear, in default, Geo Fence is currently not enabled in default. That's something that we're reconsidering given the effectiveness and the general population we have. But currently it has to be actively enabled. And Aaron is going to show you guys how to do that. It's pretty easy, but it does require that effort on your part.
Yeah. All right. So here we are on the Geo Fence page under security and Geo Fence, and it's pretty straightforward. You've got your list of countries over here on the right. You've got a map that's interactive. As you can tell, when I click a country, it marks it as gray. That's because we're in off mode. If we switch to allow, it'll show as green, which means that traffic from that country is allowed to make it to your AccessEnforcer. If we switch to block, it will show it as red. And we have a legend down here to kind of show you what that info is. So one of the I'll go ahead and finish. I do have some questions, sort of quick setup to ask, so forth. We also show all of the country information along with our network alerts that correspond to that specific country. So you can see I have 538 alerts from the United States. And we can show a heat map too, which kind of gives you like a quick overview of where things are coming from. So you can see India is pretty high up here. Here they are there. So what was your question, Ben? No, keep going. You're fine. I want to. I'll circle back on the network alerts there. What type of network alerts are you showing in that count 538? This is any network alert that we have for a given country. Okay. So it includes the firewall alerts or the snort IDS IPS alerts. Does it include the Geo Fence alerts as well? No, I don't believe so. I don't think it does. I could be wrong on. Yep. I can't remember. So essentially, this information is designed to help you activate Geo Fence
to stop these other alerts.
Yep. Yeah. The intent is to give you a quick overview of what countries you're getting alerts from and what needs to be blocked. You can see we're getting nothing from Cyprus or Argentina. So anyway, so this unassigned IP addresses, this is what we were talking about in the various data slides that Ben had. By default, it's set to allow, which means any IPs that aren't associated with a specific country will be allowed access. And our recommendation is to block those just because they were accounting for 10% of the, network alerts that we saw. So I've set up, we have a server here in Frankfurt, Germany. And we can show a quick demo of it. Let me start this going. This is kind of this is a little tool that we'll release at some point. I'll talk more about it in a sec. But for now, we're going to do a quick scan on my machine here, and you can see port 443 is open, and it's available from Germany. So let's go ahead and enable block for Germany. Well, let's do it the opposite. We'll allow only from, we'll only allow from United States and Canada, and we'll block unassigned IP addresses. Go ahead and save that real quick. Okay, so now if we come down here, first of all, we can see there were two firewall alerts from Germany, and we can scan again. And now the host seems to be down, so we're no longer able to connect. We should see some more alerts pile up here in a sec.
So you're just
so that's kind of, go ahead.
Yeah, so just to be clear, you basically are generating scans of the system to show the
Yep.
Geo Fence alerts.
Yep. Yeah. So this window is a machine that I'm connected to in Germany. So I ran a port scan on port 443 to check the machine, to check the AccessEnforcer. So we'll do it again just for good measure. Yeah. Anyway, so as you can see, it's definitely blocked. We're no longer able to access it. So we can also just block Germany if we were so inclined. Save that change. Fortunately, I don't have a port scan available on another machine. Oh, that didn't actually work. So it must be, we're marking it as coming from, oh, it's coming from the US. Oh, darn. Well, this is European Union, EU. So if we block all of Europe, maybe that'll work. Save those changes. This is kind of a cool feature that it may not be immediately apparent. You can search by continent. So let's say Asia, and then all of the countries that are displayed there fall under the continent of Asia. You can select them all by clicking the select all. We'd have to unselect first, but anyway, so now we should be blocking all of Europe. Let's try that. No, that didn't work either. Weird. So this is a good reason to go for the allow only. it's much harder. It's much harder to single out individual countries to block when you can just block them all or only allow them all.
Yeah, one question was sort of trying to think about what the anomalies might be for some of the sites that are outside those standard deviations. And my initial look, I think, is that the ones that experience the higher numbers tend to have the much higher setting. It's like only U.S. or only U.S. and Canada, and so they're blocking more countries. That seems to lead to a higher number of blocks, a higher number of IPs, and even a higher number of events per source IP. So that's was my initial thinking. But to that end, just I do think it would be helpful, given that that's where we're seeing the most effectiveness. If I want to allow only, if I want to block everything except the U.S. and Canada, Aaron, what is the quickest, most efficient? Because how someone implements this tool, it essentially results in dynamic, firewall rules that are built. Right. And so we want to be as efficient as we can because it'll improve your performance of the system as well. So what would be the most efficient way to activate that in your mind?
This configuration. So you would come in and you would set only allow, and then you would explicitly allow the countries that you wanted to have access.
Yeah.
And as we saw with the demo, it was fraught with error when trying to single out individual countries.
Yeah.
We know that the server is in Frankfurt, and when we blocked Germany, I was still able to get in. There's a lot of reasons why that may be the case. The provider that we have the server through is called Vulture, and they're I believe, a US-based company. Mm-hmm. So there's some line word with who owns the IP addresses at whatever given point.
Right.
So even though they're assigned to the Germany, the country Germany, they may not actually reside there or be routed from there or any, things like that. So this approach with allow only and block everything else is definitely the recommended approach.
Yeah.
Unless you explicitly know for sure that these IP addresses are coming from a given range.
And if you want to exempt a range or some IPs from Geo Fence, what's the easiest way to do that? Is that just in the whitelist?
Yeah, you'd want to have a static whitelist or explicit firewall rule, port forwarding rule that allowed an individual IP address or a range.
So any of the other specific settings will override the Geo Fence general setting. And remember, Geo Fence is inbound traffic. So a couple things to recognize is for a lot of sites that have ports closed, this is getting dropped, except they are hitting ports that might be listening, like the VPN or the remote access GUI for the system. But so you'd be shielding those. But so those dropped alerts, we historically haven't shown because it's so much volume. But this is a way to show those, and it also helps to see what systems might be of interest to the attackers.
Yeah.
So then
I was gonna.
Oh, go ahead.
Outbound. I was gonna demonstrate outbound, but I realized I'm not actually logged into anything that I can connect to this Frankfurt server.
Right.
From,
so to see all of the alerts, now these events that we're talking about, the numbers, they show up in the network alerts log, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So would those be there?
Which we can look.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can real quick. Let me show off this tool I'm working on. Command line tool for managing your AccessEnforcer. Shows the network alerts. We could get a summary of how many there are. Quite a few.
So there, yeah, go back to that view because it shows. So what we were doing is we're putting in the geo policy, the firewall, and the IDS IPS. Those are the different type of alerts that are happening here. And so essentially, if you're getting a lot of firewall or IDS IPS alerts from foreign countries, which you typically are, then if you activate Geo Fence, it's even a broader, more effective shielding mechanism.
And the network alerts page is where we can see. So we can see here was from the Netherlands, which I think is, no, that's Russia. So here's the Netherlands. Let me pull a new list. Should have the Russian ones. Yep. So Russia and Netherlands. So these are coming in as we speak.
So it's and you can export this to CSV if you want to dig into your own data on a site, and it's also added to the reports at a very high level, reports as well. Cool. Any other thing that makes sense to hit, or?
Not unless anyone has any questions.
I think that the couple of questions that have been presented have been answered and asked and answered, which are it doesn't stop outbound connections right now, and we do recommend that the allow only U.S. and Canada and block unassigned. So that's kind of the best implementation. And you know, if somebody's interested in looking at their data across their fleet, I might be able to get them some reviews there, if that would be interesting to explore. You know, I'd like to understand what somebody would hope to do with it, and then we could pull some data for them on that. I'm going to switch back. I've got a few more slides to run through. If I can do this properly, let's see. All right. Okay, so we're going to try to keep monitoring the questions and just talk quickly about how to get it. And obviously it's on version 5. The latest release is 5.0.1, which has this on it. And most of the units in the field have been updated. In addition to Geo Fence, we also added Gatekeeper, which has some Let's Encrypt certificate integration, significantly enhanced and managed boot speed, as well as some other items. Change the color of the login so you know it's on version 5. And there's a lot of information on the online portal about that. So obviously anything we're shipping now, new units, RMA units, in-field upgrades for eligible units, is important to know, as per usual. Configurations are forward compatible, not backward compatible. So to that end, if anyone has a extra unit out there that they keep, well, some folks have bought shelf spares or ready to go units, they need to make sure those units get plugged in and updated as well, because if you've got a network down scenario and you've got a version 4 replacement and you're replacing a version 5, you got to get it updated before you can put your config in it. So that'll be something that you'll want to do. In terms of the eligible units, some of the older 800s we're end of lifing, the 801s and the 1200s, 1201s. So all the others are eligible for upgrades. And if you're on the monthly program, make sure you talk to your sales rep for refreshes. We manage those. We'll ship you the refresh unit if it's over 3 years. If you want to do an upgrade that way in lieu of an infield upgrade, that makes sense. One of the resources, obviously with the use of this tool, significantly more memory is used, so we want to get the memory upgraded in the boxes to handle all the added functionality. In terms of pricing, so big question, how are we going to price it? We kind of internally looked at what our mission is in terms of providing the best security we can to small businesses. And our vision is to build a better community for everybody and make life easier. And our value is to keep it simple, both business-wise and implementation-wise, and straightforward, integrity. And so we came up with the good old free. So it is included in an active subscription. So if you don't have an active subscription, the security functionality is not working. We do maintain that database for you on the geofencing. And what we chose to do was for Gatekeeper is our first premium add-on feature. So I did want to highlight that difference, and we think it's appropriate given the nature of that feature. While geofencing is a little bit more broader, just SMB defensive measure, we think is appropriate for our client base to be able to use. So in terms of information, the best thing to do is check out the portal, and we've got a lot of content around geofence. We've got a video on YouTube, which is a little bit more technical setup walkthrough. Aaron does that as well. And we've got, there are no known issues published that I know of, Aaron, with geofence. We've got the change log. It goes over all the other changes in version 5, as well as the release notes. So Aaron, did you have anything else? I'll take a look, see if we have some other questions, and really appreciate everybody taking time.
Yeah, I don't have any questions. How's everyone doing?
Yeah,
I guess
it's I think the data is really quite compelling for me to see the activity and really the volume of activity and the stealthiness of the activity, and understanding that the purpose of that reconnaissance is really building a target list for the future. And so the more we can prevent people from getting information about your systems, especially if you've got open ports, we think it adds a good layer. So with that, if there's not any questions, we'll go ahead and close it out. And I want to thank everybody again for joining us. Aaron, thanks for taking time to do the demo. And again, we appreciate your support. And if you need anything, you know where we are, let us know. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Cheers.